I felt like I was in the middle of a king tide and that I was out drowning, in the ocean, and I was trying to swim to shore, and every just one stroke that I would take, another wave would just come and smash me again.
I'm Ange.
And I'm Beck, and we are
Gold Diggers.
It's not what you're thinking.
And we dig the gold out of everyday life stories.
Like today's guest.
I think the gold in my story is that I've been able to turn what was really hard in my life into a greater purpose to help other people.
Honey, you're my sugar.
If you had to break out into karaoke right now, what song would you choose?
I Will Survive, Gloria Gaynor, all the time, every time.
R-E-S-P-E-C-T, found out what it means to me. R-E-S-P-E-C-T.
Don't you find it funny with music, right? You could go decades without hearing a song, but the moment it plays, you know all the words.
Oh, yeah, it's like at your parties and, what's that one? And whenever it comes on, everyone just breaks out into dance. It's from the 80s. And I can't remember.
You're the voice trying to understand
that one.
it. Everyone dances to that, doesn't they?
Yeah.
And I've just shared my dodgy singing voice with the world.
So did I. Twinning. High five.
Twinning.
Can't reach you.
Yeah, and I even watched recently, there's like a reel or something of people that have Alzheimer's, and they've obviously lost their memory, but you play a song even back from like 30, 40, 50 years ago, and they remember the words, and it just brings them to life. Isn't music so powerful?
It really is,
Yeah,
definitely. And it reminds you of seasons in your life and all sorts of things, doesn't it?
Okay, what is the most impacting song then that like always brings back memories for you?
Oh, I remember Unchained Melody.
Yeah.
Do you remember that?
Yep.
That takes me back to the 90s.
Is it because of Ghost, the movie?
Oh, yeah, it was from that, but I just remember loving the song. It was just,
I think mine was the Bryan Adams one, and it was Everything I Do It For You.
Oh, that was our wedding song.
Oh, there you go. Why didn't you pick that one?
Yes, that was what I was going to say. It just seemed too obvious. Sorry, Tony.
It probably.
It was the wedding song.
It's all right, Tony. I've got your back.
But that takes me right back to the wedding and our first dance.
I think it's because in
romantic.
England anyway, it was in the charts for like 16 weeks.
Yes.
And it was for Robin Hood, the movie, which I absolutely
Wasn't
loved.
that great?
Yeah.
Gee, there was some good movies in the 90s too.
I know. We were in the best
Braveheart.
era.
Oh,
The 80s
so
movies
good.
were amazing too.
Yeah.
Titanic, of course, Celine Dion.
Yes.
My heart
as
will
soon
go
as
on.
you say Titanic, you hear the theme music too, don't you?
Well,
So
yes,
you
of
should
course.
sing
Thankfully,
it,
I
Ange.
don't sing that.
Come on, you should just sing
I'm going to do you a favour and not sing it. And on that note, we'll go to today's podcast.
Honey, you're my sugar.
So today we have Kerrie Atherton in the studio with us. Now, you're not new to the studio and you're not new to the Gold Diggers podcast. Are you, Kerrie?
No, I'm not. I think I was on your first or second episode.
Yeah, it was
Just
Yeah,
after
it
COVID.
was really early on.
Yeah.
We wanted to get you in because not only have you got an incredible story, but also you've actually been involved with the Gold Diggers podcast, secretly, covertly, haven't you?
Yes, I have.
I loved your little eye flicker then, Lou.
So we are going to reveal a big secret to you right now, that Kerrie has been our secret saucer of our guests for the podcast for the last, this past year maybe.
Yeah, that's
Secret
right.
squirrel.
So if any of you have been wondering, how is it that Beck and I don't know our guest and yet they're invited into the studio, Kerrie is responsible. So
all
welcome
you're
to the
doing.
studio, Kerrie.
Thank you. And I've been very selective with who I've chosen for you.
Oh, yes. Yeah. And what comes into that selection process? What are you looking
Well,
for?
definitely people who have actually come out the other side of their hard times, because that's something that's really important when I'm seeking guests myself, either for my own podcast or for my Stories of Hope events.
Yeah.
And I don't think there's anyone greater to bring hope to somebody that's still in the middle of the journey than someone that's come out the other side.
Yeah.
Someone who's still kind of stuck in that victim mentality or their pain, they can sympathise with other people, and other people can sympathise with them and be drawn to them through the pain. But I want to actually draw people together through the hope.
Yeah.
And so that's why I've been really, as selective as I am for my stuff, that's selective for you too.
Yeah.
Well, you touched a little bit on Stories of Hope there, and I know you've got a podcast, so we'll talk about the podcast in a moment. But Stories of Hope now, how long has that been running?
That's coming up to 8 years in January.
Wow.
8 years already.
I know. I don't know where the time's gone.
Wow, you'll be up for long service leave soon.
Yeah, I don't know if I want to quit though. I actually had thought after 5 years that it may have run its course.
Yeah.
But kind of COVID came in and stuffed all that up.
Yeah.
And
Probably gave a lot of people things to get over again for you to give Stories of Hope.
Well, let's just give a bit of context. Explain
Yeah.
what Stories of Hope is and what has it been doing for the past 8 years?
Stories of Hope is an event that I started in the middle of the worst time of my life. And I talk about having 3 rock bottoms in my life, and I think I shared the first 2 of them in the first episode. So the first one was overcoming addictions, and the second one was when I lost my mum. And then I think the third one was when I had also then lost my dad and other family members. I was still grieving my mum's death as well. And then my husband became really, really sick, and they didn't know what was wrong with him for a long time, and he had to give up his job. And probably a couple of months after he gave up his job, my son ended up moving to Sydney for work, like the empty nest thing happened.
Yeah.
My daughter had already moved out at 20, but my son was probably around 23 or 24. And he was leaving home, and we were really close. And then not long after that too, we had to have my dog put down. That I had Ellie for 15 years. And
So you were in a season of loss. You felt like
shocking
you were
season
a lot
of
going
loss.
on. Yeah.
Just terrible. And I don't know if I talked about this in the first episode, but I felt like I was in the middle of a king tide, and that I was out drowning, in the ocean, and I was trying to swim to shore, and every just one stroke that I would take, another wave would just come and smash me again. And I thought I was drowning, and I didn't know whether I'd make it back.
Yeah.
And I think in the middle of all of this too was the fact that I couldn't drink because I'm a recovering alcoholic.
Yeah.
And most people I know would have maybe 1 or 2 wines or something like that just to take the edge off. Or alcohol's just such a large part of culture for so many different reasons, not just for entertainment, but for also just numbing a bit of pain out and helping you sleep. And I had to go through all that without any kind of external thing to numb that pain out.
It would have
Yeah.
really put you to the test too, wouldn't it?
Yeah, and I felt like drinking. So I was struggling then with wondering if I was going to make it without drinking. But as you girls know, I've got a really strong faith. That was really the thing that saved me. But after a 6-week period of becoming so depressed and locking myself away and totally isolating myself, I knew, as somebody that had been a counsellor for many years and worked in the mental health field, I knew I was really in trouble mentally. And I knew that if I didn't get out of that tunnel then, that I probably would start drinking again. So I forced myself to go to a women's conference. And at that conference, and you were going to ask me too later, I know, about some of my favourite speakers, but this comes into that answer as well. So when I first got to that conference, I was in the middle of just, like I said, the worst time in my life. I couldn't stop crying. I was just so depressed. And up on the stage was Matt Galinsky, a much loved chef on the Sunshine Coast, who at that time, probably just 5 years before, had lost his entire family in a Christmas
that's-
Day fire.
That was tragic.
I remember hearing that story. It's
Yeah.
Boxing Day, wasn't it? I mean,
Yeah.
yeah.
And the Christmas tree caught on fire.
Yeah.
Yeah. And it just hit me that he was smiling up on the stage and he was cooking and doing what he loved, and people were laughing and just enjoying what he was doing. And the fact to me that he could get up there and do that, even that short amount of time after.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's
Gave you
remarkable.
hope.
Yeah, it makes me emotional still, Made me know that I was going to be okay.
Yeah.
And 2 other people shared that day.
Yeah.
And they, their stories let me know that I would be okay as well. And I had a light bulb moment right there and then that I had actually overcome so much in my own life, and that if I could share my stories, that I, could let other people know that they would be okay.
Yeah.
Stories are so
Yeah.
powerful, aren't they? They just carry so much weight to not just like for us in telling them, but to help other people through that journey. So I know you've been doing Stories of Hope now for 8 years.
Yeah.
And is that the heart behind it, is to encourage other people through the power of story?
It is, but it's kind of twofold. I think the thing is, loneliness has played such a big part in my life, and also loneliness through the pain that I went through. And I desperately searched for somebody that had been through the extent of trauma that I'd been through when you put everything together. And I actually really couldn't find that person.
Wow.
And I guess when I got to that conference, I heard people that had, and I didn't feel alone anymore. And so I know personally too, through the journey of addiction and spending so many, years in the 12-step program, how lonely struggle times are for people. And I never want anybody, if I've got anything to do with it, to feel that alone on their journey.
Yeah. Because you've been through it.
Like a crybaby today. I don't know. Yeah, it's a bit emotional thinking about it all. But
That's where you've come from, isn't it? And you've
Yeah.
got this empathy for people who are going through it, and you want to give them hope during those times of loneliness and hardship. And we know, we were just talking yesterday about the guests that we've had on the show, and the things that really stand out is it really gives you a great perspective on life when you hear what other people have been through. Like sometimes you think what you're going through is hard, and it is, but then you hear of the hard thing the next person's gone through and the next person, and we've all gone through hard things, and we can all overcome those hard things through the encouragement of stories like Stories of Hope and the guests that you've sent to us.
And what you probably don't realise is that a lot of those people actually have been the Stories of Hope guests at the events.
Yeah.
So a lot of those people that they've been through the worst pain imaginable,
Yeah.
but they come along. They've been supporting Stories of Hope for that many years, because we've really built a community there of people that are not stuck in their victim pain, but they're people that want to get out of that place and that want to use what was hard in their life to help other people.
It's so important.
And it's such an encouraging environment there.
And so how important has that been for you to build this community? Because you talked about feeling really lonely. So was it something you were searching for, or is it a realisation that everyone's searching for the same thing? And so if it's not there, I'll create it.
Yeah, well, I think that was the thing. I thought, I can't find that person for me, and so I'm going to become that person for everyone else, or I'm going to find those people. And so I think I had a purpose right there in my heart, that light bulb moment. A purpose was birthed, and I felt lost and the greatest thing that people need when they've totally hit rock bottom is they need connection and they need a purpose. And without those two things, people really can't go on. And so that's something that I constantly talk about whenever I'm being interviewed or when I'm at Stories of Hope, when I'm with my counselling clients, training people in mental health workshops, the power of connection and the power of purpose. And there's a saying that's often said out there that the opposite of addiction is connection.
Yeah.
And it's so true, because when somebody who's a recovering addict or alcoholic finds the right connection, that's when they find healing and
Absolutely.
recovery.
Yeah, connection is so vital, and we all need it, whether we're in recovery or not.
Yeah,
and I think sometimes we
absolutely.
don't realise the extent to how we need connection. And we're in a very disconnected world now, despite all the advances in technology in order to connect us. So what difference have you seen this has made in others?
Well, I think people thrive in that community, and I have just connected so many people up with each other. And at the events, I still am hearing about connections that were made and people that have become really close friends through meeting at Stories of Hope, and the sharing of their stories has gone out to reach so far. And my dream was, when I had that initial light bulb moment, that maybe I could help change people's lives in my community, and then maybe Australia and maybe the world. And when COVID shut us down and we couldn't connect anymore, that was another time that was really, really hard. That was probably like the third rock bottom. And I felt like I was, being hit with a trigger trauma tsunami then, because I'd found the connection and that purpose, and then that was kind of taken away. And then being an empath and somebody who deeply cares for other people, being a face-to-face counsellor and speaking to people, to groups of people and crowds of people, that was taken away. So I realised that if I was going to be able to get through COVID and get through that total loneliness and disconnection, that I would have to repurpose what I was doing. So I started interviewing people from around the world that were really resilient.
Yeah.
And I, started watching a lot of different things, and I thought, if I can interview resilient people from around the world and share their stories online, then the rest of the world who are going through COVID and maybe haven't been through much else, they will know that they're going to get through COVID if these other people had got through.
So who did
much
you
worse.
reach out to, and what countries?
So I actually reached out to people all around the world.
Yeah.
I've got some interviews which are in my podcast now from a couple of guys in the Netherlands, a guy that lives in Florida.
How did you find these people?
I know, it just fascinates me, because I think, that's gutsy to just
Kerrie-
reach out to these random people across the world.
Kerrie the connector.
She totally.
Well, this is probably the weirdest thing that I did was I watched this show. Being a drug and alcohol counsellor, okay, I'm really interested in shows like that. So I watched this show called Cocaine Cowboys, The Kings of Miami.
Yeah.
And it actually hit number one all around the world for probably a couple of months or something. And in the beginnings, there was this guy with a suit, and he was just, doing this talking, and I realised through the show that he was actually the guy behind the scenes that actually got the two biggest drug dealers in Miami that were the stars of the show going. He actually was, he actually introduced them to that world of drug dealing.
Right.
And it showed the devastation, it showed the glamorous lifestyle of these two guys, like billions and billions of dollars going through their hands, jets, movie stars, all that kind of stuff. And they ended up being locked up eventually. But then at the end of the show, you were kind of struck with this devastation of all the lives that had been touched by drugs and everything. And at the end of the show, you saw the guy in the suit in jails handing out Bibles and talking to all the young offenders in jail about how they can turn their life around.
Yeah.
And so George Valdez was the story of hope through that whole thing. And he actually set that whole Netflix series up. And I thought, I've got to get this. I really want to interview this guy. And so I just
straight to him.
So I actually just sent him a message. Tracked him down on LinkedIn and just sent him a LinkedIn message. Not thinking that he'd ever get back to me, who's little old Kerrie from Australia. And I said, look, I've got an Australian, events platform called Stories of Hope Australia at that time. And would you be able to do an interview with me and share your story? And he said, I'd love to.
Wow.
But he had a really intense light bulb moment, and he was one of the 15 men that I chose from the people that I'd interviewed from around the world to put in my book, and he was happy to do that. And he had a really intense light bulb moment that turned his entire life around. And a lot of people would be like, oh, yeah, he's a drug dealer and he's wrecked people's lives, but we all make mistakes.
Yeah.
And we all make poor decisions, and there's not a person alive that doesn't make a poor decision or make a mistake. Some have worse consequences than others, but if someone's truly repentant, I believe they deserve another chance to change.
Yeah.
And George is true testament to that.
Wow.
So you reached out to him, he responded, and then you've got some in the Netherlands as well.
Yeah, a guy who's probably, his story really touched me deeply, more so than a lot of other stories. And his name's Joseph Ubelkas. And
I'm so glad you're able to pronounce that. How long have you been practicing?
Hopefully, Joseph, if you're listening, I hope I did that correctly. But Joseph was a businessman, and he travelled away for a weekend. It was a little bit of a holiday, I think, but he had a business call to do, and he went to call on his client, and he was infiltrated in a corrupt police raid where they charged him falsely for importation of millions of dollars of a drug. And he was actually jailed in his early, I think he was in his 20s. He was jailed and sentenced to many years in jail. And he was totally innocent. This had been set up by the police that somebody would take the fall over there. And it was letters from his mother that kept him going.
Wow.
And he's written a book, Letters from My Mother. And one thing she encouraged him to do was to build a tiny garden. And they they didn't have their own cell, they slept like sardines on top of each other in mass cells. And it was having this tiny little garden and the letters from his mother that just kept his hope alive. And the prisoners, they gleaned so much hope from seeing the little tiny seeds grow into little plants that they all asked him if he could build them a garden as well. And so his mother started sending letters to the other prisoners, and it was just like this hope haven in the middle of this absolute devastation.
Wow.
And so he was acquitted and got out. But when he was sharing about the letters from his mother, he was just so emotional, and you could just see how much he'd suffered and how much of his life he'd lost. But now he's an international speaker.
And so how did you get in touch with him? Did you read his book and you say, excuse me, Mr. What was his name?
Joseph.
Mr. Joseph, I'm Kerrie.
No, I actually didn't know about his book then. So in the middle of COVID, the Professional Speakers Association and Jerry Morris, who is in my second book, who was he was an identity on the Sunshine Coast who had a speakers bureau, and he was run over by a car. And he was a speaker at Stories of Hope, and he was in my book. But he'd moved, and he was actually bringing together speakers from, around the country and different sides of the world. And he actually put on an event which had Joseph Ubelkas and another guy named Ferry Zandvliet. Now, Ferry is also in my book, and he was the survivor of the 2015 Paris terrorist attacks in the Bataclan Theatre, where 89 people were shot dead.
Oh, wow.
And so I asked Ferry and Joseph if I could interview them, and they both agreed. Yeah. And I think it was kind of such, even though it was a really devastating time for speakers and people in this industry, it was also kind of such a time where all those people kind of bandied together to just create hope however we could and to keep our own momentum and encourage one another. And so it was this really special time where maybe somebody who would normally say, oh, no, who are you? You know, I'm not speaking for you or something, where it was like everybody just kind of connected and really went the extra mile for each other. And so I managed to get these great speakers, you know, from around the world.
And I know you've had the machine gun preacher as well.
Had the machine gun preacher. He came to
you remember that movie?
Yeah, he came to, who was the guy that played him?
Gerard Butler.
Gerard Butler, yes. And the machine gun preacher came and spoke at Sunshine Coast Stories of Hope.
Yeah.
And that was a really amazing night, that one. But one thing I wanted to share was on the first anniversary of Stories of Hope, I invited Matt Galinsky to come and speak.
Yes.
And that was one of the highlights of the journey, was to have the person that was such an inspiration to me on that day when I turned up at that women's conference to come and speak at my event. And we went from 30 people in the upstairs room on the very first night when I shared my vision to a year later we had 150 people in that room to hear Matt Galinsky. And it was just an amazing night.
Yeah, wow. And so did you share with him the impact that he had on you?
Yeah, I did. But he's so down to earth. And he's like, oh, that's great. You know, I was just doing a cooking demonstration. And I'm like, yeah, but it just really, really moved me.
Yeah. It's a turning point for you.
Yeah, it was. It really was. And I had that thought after I saw him and heard the other two ladies that my pain will not be in vain and I will use it for other people's gain.
I like that.
And one of the other amazing women that there's been so I equally love all of the speakers. Like, it's really hard to actually, so many people have said, oh, who was your favourite speaker? And I just really can't answer that.
I get that because we have the same thing. It's like trying to pick your favourite child, isn't it?
Yeah, I know.
I only have one, so that's easy for me.
But there was one lady that I met at we went to kind of a speakers retreat where we were learning how to be speakers, and she was the first woman ever to row the Atlantic Ocean solo.
Wow.
Yeah, wow.
And she embarked on that at 50 years of age.
Wow.
And she just got a little bit bored in her job as a
I know, I'll just row the
physiotherapist.
A bit bored.
Was it like some escape? I might just go rowing for a little while, see where I end up.
And that is just so far beyond anything that I would ever do.
Wow,
like, to me, that just takes so much guts and so much courage. But what made her story even more moving and more remarkable was the fact that just as she was getting on the plane to fly over to another country to then get on her boat, she got a message to say from her sister that her father had passed away.
Wow.
She had the dilemma, what do I do? Do I still go? And she had a whole lot of sponsors that had sponsored her, and I think she was on the sea for about 3 or 4 months. So it was massive planning and everything.
Yes.
And her family said go.
Yeah.
But she went, but she felt that deep loneliness and having to grieve alone.
Yeah.
And I think the fact that I'd grieved losing both my parents, I kind of really knew what she would be going through, but kind of not really, because I was at home in a bed and had coffee and chocolate and people to talk to, but she was totally alone on an ocean doing this rigorous feat while grieving, the death of her dad. But she had a little bird turn up and she called him Ray, and that was her dad's name.
Yeah.
And so the bird just kept turning up everywhere at random different times that she needed support. And so to her, that was her little message that her dad was kind of with her on the road.
I just love the courage you have to just reach out to people randomly. Like, not everyone can do that. I don't think it's in me to be able to do that. I would be really nervous or self-conscious or whatever. Like, what goes through your mind when you're thinking, do you expect that they're going to respond to you, or what are you expecting when you reach out?
A lot of the times I think maybe they won't. But you see, the thing was I was bullied really badly at school, and I didn't have any friends, and I was publicly humiliated on many occasions. And so throughout my entire life, I've had a terrible fear of public humiliation. Mm-hmm. And a lot of people don't know that. And that goes with sometimes when you're feeling like you're really struggling and you're alone, and people think, oh, she doesn't need support. I've had people say, I thought you've got it all together and you help everyone else and you don't ever look like you're struggling. Well, my message is that sometimes it can be the people that we think the least need support that can be struggling the most. And we can never, ever just judge from the outside and make an assumption that somebody doesn't need support or help, because that can be further from the truth. Yeah. But because I'd really suffered so much public humiliation, I never, ever really stepped out into all the dreams that I had. Mm-hmm. And so when I had this light bulb moment about starting Stories of Hope, I was absolutely terrified about, well, what if I set up an event and nobody turned up? But the fear of not achieving my dreams finally for once in my life became much greater than the fear of stepping out and facing the public humiliation. And something that I talk to my counselling clients about is go to the worst case scenario. And if you can face the worst case scenario, that takes the fear right out of that. And so I went to the worst case scenario, and I had a beautiful friend, Monique, who was a marketing manager, and she was kind of pushing me from behind, and we caught up, and I said, Monique, what if nobody turns up? And she said, there'll be at least one. She said, I'll be there, or there'll be at least one person that will turn up. And then I said, I know if one person turns up, I will share my vision with that one person. And she said, that's the spirit. And all of a sudden, that was my goal, for one person to turn up to my first Stories of Hope event. Yeah. And I knew my daughter was there, and my husband. So there was two people.
Yeah, nice.
You'd already multiplied.
I think my son might have been in Sydney.
You doubled your expectation.
That's exactly right. And it was 5 minutes to 7.
Yeah. And
I was standing in the room with my hubby and my daughter, and nobody else was in the room. And at 2 minutes to 7, one other person turned up. Aww. And I was like, okay, my worst fear has come true, but I'm going to give my vision with everything that I've got.
Yeah. Good on you.
And then 1 minute later, I looked to the left, and just one after another, all these people started walking through the door.
Oh, wow.
And they'd been trapped downstairs because the car park, the door was locked.
Oh, no.
So there'd been like 28 people down in the car park waiting to come up. But because I was so ready I'd face the fear and so ready to share my dream with the one person, I was just so blown away when the 30 people turned up.
Yeah.
And I went to the Sands Tavern, who have supported me for 8 years with the room.
That's great.
For nothing. And if they'd said no when I approached them, which was another big thing to go and approach them, I would never have gone ahead. So I'm so grateful to them because they put my dream in motion. But the next week I said to them, we had a really great night. We packed out the upstairs room and they said, well, that's okay. We've just built a brand new function room downstairs that seats 150 people. So we'll give you that.
That's amazing,
And then
Kerrie.
a year later, we had 150 people pack it out with
That's
Matt Galinsky.
amazing.
Yes.
Are they going to build a room for 300 people? Because that might be next year, Kerrie.
I'm just curious for you is like we all have that inner dialogue that, you know, oh, maybe it's just little insignificant me. What difference am I going to make? Are they going to respond to me? Sometimes we've just got to get over ourselves, haven't we, in order to fulfill our dreams.
Absolutely.
Like, so
yeah.
what was that journey for you? What did you have to overcome in yourself to be this courageous woman that will go and approach, you know, people from overseas that have a big story that been on Netflix? You know, what makes you think, what gave you that self-confidence that I can do this and I'm worthy of a response?
I think what gave me that was it's more about my desire to change a life. And I remember what I was getting at before was that I really want to help the everyday person share their story. But so many people, when I ask them to share their story, they say, oh, I haven't really got much of a story to tell or much of a story to offer. And everybody's got a story that will positively impact one person in some way.
Yeah.
At least.
At least, that's
Yeah.
right, at least. And suicide prevention is at the base of everything I do. And if I adopted this mentality of it was about if one person shares up, I'll share my vision. And I adopted this mantra with stories of hope. And I had to, because so often people can get caught up with numbers. How many people are turning up to the event? How many people are watching? But if we can actually change one person's life, then that's what it's all about for me.
Yeah.
That one person's going to be around tomorrow because they found hope.
Yeah, that's
And we don't know what life changer that one person's going to be, and we don't know what ripple effect that one person's going to go on to have with the rest of the world.
Yeah.
And a young girl that I had helped voluntary for a couple of years when she was 16 has gone on to become someone that's trained leaders all around the world, and they've opened up homes for at-risk kids all around the world.
Yeah.
And she sent me an email which impacted me so greatly and was a great reminder of that it's all about the ones, about because you helped me, I've been able to have a ripple effect into the lives of thousands and thousands.
amazing. Great.
That's so important.
That's the
isn't it?
gold.
Yeah. Well, that's so important, isn't it? Because we have to sometimes get out of our own way
Yeah.
in order to actually impact the world in the way that we dream to do.
That's right.
So that's incredible.
And when you're like reaching out to famous people, it's like you've really got nothing to lose, do you? The worst they can say is no
That's right.
or
That's
not
it.
respond.
And I always put a little prayer up that the people that I'm meant to connect with will come across my path, and I ask for guidance with that. So if somebody does say no, I don't take it personally. I just take it as they're not the right people for me, or they're not the right people to assist my mission.
And Kerrie, what role has faith played in your life?
Oh, it's been massive. I had a spiritual experience when I was 18 and about to end my life, and I heard the voice of God say, don't do it. If you hang on a bit longer, you'll find happiness one day. And if I hadn't have had that, I wouldn't be here today. And I've been saved I had an accidental overdose where I was watching my body on the floor of a nightclub and I was unconscious, and I felt like I was that close to death. I had one night where I was drunk and I was in an alleyway and 4 guys pulled up in a car and tried to drag me into a car. I've just had so many incidences of God stepping in when I was in grave danger and trouble. And I just know that without a faith I wouldn't be here. I would have ended my life.
Yeah, wow.
Yeah, wow.
Well, Ange, I think it might be time for gold.
It's a very powerful story that you have, Kerrie. I'm so inspired by your journey because all the trauma, all the trials and troubles that you've been through in your life have been poured into your purpose. And that's to really impact the world and make a space where people can connect, where they can bond, where they can share, where they can journey together. And that's quite a rare thing nowadays. Like, it's really difficult sometimes for people to find that. And that's why it's such need for it. And a space where there's no judgment either. We're not looking down on each other because of the trials that you've been through in life, but to really feel love and accepted. And I know at the core of that is your faith, but like you've just kind of like spread your wings really, like you're a big mother hen, aren't you? Spread your wings really wide and brought all of these people into a safe space where they can land, be themselves, feel love, accepted, and heal. And I just think that's so incredible, Kerrie. I'm immensely proud of you because I've watched this journey. I was in the very first stories.
I know. Angela's been in my book and such a great supporter. And I remember you giving me the flowers on the stage that night, and I was just, gosh, that was one of the highlights of my life.
So
bringing the flowers.
That one. Was that the very first one?
The very first Stories of Hope.
Yeah.
I was in your very first book when this was just a dream and you didn't know if you could do it. And 8 years in now, and you've gone international, Kerrie. It takes a lot of tenacity, a lot of courage, a lot of determination to even pick yourself up when you have those doubts. Oh, this isn't making an impact. It isn't changing people's lives, to carry on. I'm so proud of you for doing that.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah, Kerrie, you are such an inspirational person. And I love that at your lowest point, like you were one of the people like who you interview, because at your lowest point, instead of giving up, you actually reached out and invented something, which is amazing, isn't it? So you could have, like you said, you knew that if you had kept going the way you were going, then you would have ended up in a spiral of depression and not being able to get out of it. But you made a choice in that moment, and that choice has changed the lives of, we don't know how many, because as you say, if you impact one person, we don't know how many people that person's impacted, and then those people have gone on to impact. So your ripple effect across the world is something we're only going to know when we get to heaven. And I'm so glad that you heard God's voice when you were ready to give up that first time, because if you'd succeeded in your suicide, there are so many lives that would not have been touched. And so I want to say thank you on behalf of all of them. And I feel teary. You're just beautiful, and
that's a bit of an emotional moment. That
Well, you just don't know the amount of lives that it's saved. I think some of the best ideas are creating something we need ourselves. And you saw something that you needed, which was a space to connect as a recovering addict, and a place where you could connect with others, where you didn't feel alone. And so you've created it. Yeah. Amazing. Anyway,
let's get the tissue box. Thank you so much.
We'll just continue crying here as we say goodbye to you, and thank you so much for being here, Kerrie, sharing our story and finding all of our amazing guests. We are indebted to you.
And I love every single one of them.
Yes, of course.
And you girls too. Thank you.
Thanks, Kerrie. Thanks for listening to the Gold Diggers podcast.
If you want to be a guest or you want to reach out, you can do so on our website, thegolddiggers.com.au.
We also share behind-the-scenes footage and giveaways across our socials on TikTok, Instagram, YouTube and Facebook.
We dig for gold every Wednesday, so subscribe and follow now so that you don't miss a story that could change your life.
I need your, my sugar.